Hello everybody, today we're talking about dual agency in real estate, and what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to tell you what it is, give you the basic definition of dual agency, and I'm going to tell you 10 things that you might not know about dual agency so that you can make up your mind in the future if you're ever going to buy a home, if you would consider dual agency, or if you would pass and do something more traditional like hire your own buyer, broker's agent. The channel is Living in Arizona, and I post videos every single week about living in the northern Arizona towns. My name is Dawn Dickinson, and I am a realtor in Arizona, and I sell property mostly in Sedona, Verde Valley, Prescott area, and Flagstaff area. So if you ever have a question about buying or selling real estate, my contact information is always in the description below, and you can give me a call, text, email, and I will get back to you. Okay, the first thing you need to know about dual agency is what is it? Basically, it's sometimes called limited representation, and there are two types. The first type really is not an issue. The first type will happen where you have two different agents working on a transaction. One will represent the seller and the other will represent the buyer, and both of those agents work for the same broker. So, for instance, if I have another agent in my office who is listing a property and I bring a buyer and we're trying to make a deal to sell that property, we will have to make you sign the form that says limited representation, that you know that both agents work for the same brokerage. Usually this is not a conflict of interest because you have two different people, so basically they're doing the best to represent their own client. The time you have trouble is the second type of dual agency, and that is where you have one agent who was listing the property for sale for the seller and also is representing the buyer for that same transaction. So I'm going to tell you a few things that you need to know if you're ever doing this. Now, this will sometimes happen where a person is looking for a house, they don't really have a buyer's agent, and they see a house for sale and they like it, and they call the number on the sign and they try to make a deal through the listing agent that is selling the home. There are other ways that this can happen, but this would be a common scenario. The first thing you're going to want to know is you're going to have lack of full representation if you have one agent representing both sides of the transaction. Now, some of you might think that the listing agent's loyalty is going to be split 50% to the seller and 50% to you, and that you're okay with that, but in reality, the listing agent's loyalty will always lie with the seller. The seller is the one that hired them, the seller is the one that's paying their commission, so they're going to be loyal to the seller first and then loyal to you in second place. Now, number two is an item I want to clarify that's a bit of a myth. A lot of people seem to think that if they go directly to the listing agent, directly to the seller's agent, that they're going to get a better deal on the house because now the seller's agent won't be sharing the commission with the buyer's agent and they're going to just let the seller pay them less commission. Well, that's not true, and the reason that is because the listing agent has made the seller sign a listing agreement long before it ever went up on the MLS, and those communications are negotiated up front. So say the listing agent is getting paid 5% to do the transaction. They've also in the listing agreement said that if a buyer's agent brings me a client, a buyer, that I will split the commission with them a certain way. Typically it's half and half. So typically a listing agent, if they've negotiated 5% commission, they're going to pay the buyer's agent 2.5%, and that's already in writing, negotiated and agreed upon up front. So because you're going directly doesn't mean that you're getting a better deal. It means the listing agent will just keep the entire 5 or 6% or whatever they negotiated all to themselves. Okay, number three is something that actually hasn't happened yet, but a lot of you are probably keeping tabs of the lawsuit with the National Association of Realtors. Right now, the settlement has said that the listing agent does not have to pay the buyer's agent commission. Well, that's actually always been true. It's all negotiable, right? But they are saying that they don't have to. So some sellers are going to say, well, I'm not going to pay that. I'm only going to pay my listing agent 2.5% to 3%, and I'm not going to pay the buyer's agent. Well, first of all, there are a couple things. This is not going to be implemented until summer, and it actually has to be signed in by the judge. So we don't know exactly how the fallout is going to be. But one of the things that can can happen is if you have a buyer's agent, you can have that buyer's agent say, hey, I'm going to give you an offer if you will agree to pay my commission, and you can get your buyer's agent commission paid that way. That's one possibility. Again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But the second thing you might be thinking is, oh, well, I'll just go directly to the listing agent and they will represent me for free. Well, imagine that. Imagine you have a listing agent who's going to have to do now two jobs, right? Because basically the buyer's part of the transaction has a bunch of activities required by the buyer's agent that now the seller's agent is going to have to do themselves for free. And the other thing that you need to know is that there are costs associated with doing a transaction. So the listing agent is now going to have to pay the costs associated with both sides of the transaction. So you're going to have to pay your broker both sides. You're going to have to pay the broker for the seller side and the buyer side. You're going to have to pay a transaction coordinator to do each side, the seller side and the buyer side. So one, you're trying to have a buyer or seller's agent represent you for free. And the other thing is the seller's agent is not only not getting paid for your part of the transaction. So imagine what kind of a great job they're going to do, right? They're doing it for free, and there are costs associated with doing that side that they're going to have to make out of their own pocket. Imagine how well represented you can be when you do that, when you think that the buyer's agent is, or the seller's agent is just going to do your half of the transaction and not get paid at all. At least before with the dual agency, they were getting paid and keeping the entire pie. But if the seller is not agreeing to pay both sides of the transaction and you think the seller's agent is going to do your part for free, that may not happen. So again, we don't know what's going to happen with this lawsuit, but just if you're thinking that is what you're going to do, keep that little point in mind. Okay, the number 4 thing I want you to know about is if you have lack of full representation because you're doing dual agency, that means negotiations on both sides are going to be compromised. That listing agent is certainly not going to be sticking their neck out to try to get you the best price on a deal when they want the seller to get the highest price possible. If you think you're going to get a better deal this way, just remember the listing agent is still going to try to get the highest price possible for their seller because their seller is their primary client and the one that they are loyal to. Okay, issue number 5 you might want to realize is that there is going to be a little bit of compromise in confidentiality, because now when you're going to the seller's agent and you're trying to draft up an offer, you're going to need proof that you're able to pay for it. And so you're going to need to give the seller's agent your full pre-qualification form, meaning the most that you're able to buy. And so now they know if you're saying, I can only pay $350, they know that that's not true because they've got your pre-qualification form saying that you can pay $450. The other thing is that you may have to show them your bank account if you're paying cash, and now the seller knows, oh, you know, you're telling me you can only pay $500,000, but I see you got $1 million in the bank. So again, the confidentiality makes it difficult for you to get the best negotiation possible. Number 6, I want to just mention briefly, is it's possible that there could be legal risks that occur because you have limited representation and there's a conflict of interest. I'm not going to give you any examples at this point, but just this is something that could arise during or after the transaction. Number 7 is you may have limited expertise when you're having the seller's agent represent you as a buyer, because the seller's agent typically may do all listings, and so they're not cognizant to some of the issues that buyers might want to know about, because they're not thinking that way, because they're thinking because most of their business is looking at the seller's perspective, and so you might be missing out on some information or expertise that would go along with you hiring someone that does mostly buyers transactions. Number 8 is you have the potential to lose out on incentives because they might be undisclosed. And I'm just going to give you a hypothetical example. Say you go into a house and the carpet's kind of old. If you go directly to the listing agent might know, you know, that carpet is old and I bet my seller would give a $5,000 carpet allowance if the buyer's agent just mentions it. And you go in there and you don't say anything. Well, if you had a buyer's agent, the buyer's agent might say, let me see if there's any incentives on this transaction, and they might find out that, hey, if we ask for a carpet allowance, we will get it. And so you're missing out because of that limited representation, again, if you go directly and use dual agency. Okay, now the last two things are very important. Number 9 is you're going to have less guidance in your buyer representation. And I'm going to give you 3 examples where this could come into play. One is you've gone directly to a seller's agent because you saw the sign on the house and you called and you liked it. Now, the seller's agent might know there is a house 3 blocks away, the same floor plan, slightly different price. They're not going to bring that up and say, why don't we see this other house just to make sure you're getting the one that's exactly perfect for you, because they want their listing to be sold. The other thing that could happen is when the listing agent is trying to draft up the best offer, they may not have all of the comps that they're showing you for sales of similar homes that have sold in the past 6 months. You might have a better chance, or you will have a better chance if you have your own buyer's agent to say, you know, that price is a little high. Maybe we could offer $10,000 less and still get the home. So that listing agent, when you're dual agency, is not going to be recommending you offer a lower price than she would if she is representing the seller, or he. Again, I'm not trying to be biased here. And then the final thing with your lack of guidance is during the home inspection process. So say you hire a home inspector and a termite inspector and they find something and you're like, oh, what is this? And the listing agent might say, oh, it's nothing. Seller's not going to fix that. Don't worry about it. Whereas if you have your own buyer's agent, the buyer's agent might say, let's look into this and maybe ask to have something fixed. And then the last thing that might come up is during the inspection period, you've hired a home inspector, you've hired a termite inspector. If something comes up in the inspection process and you're working directly with the seller's agent could downplay the importance of what was found. They might say, oh, that's going to be in every house, or, well, yeah, that's an issue, but the seller won't fix that. Well, if you have a buyer's agent and you say, you know, I'm concerned about this, the buyer's agent will say, well, we'll ask for them to fix it. They can always say no. And then you might have a chance of getting your issue addressed before you buy the house. So those 3 things are going to be issues that could come up because you have less guidance when you're doing dual agency. And that would result in you having a less favorable deal than if you had hired a buyer's agent yourself. And then finally, number 10 is something that happens sometimes. Sometimes during a transaction, you uncover something you don't like and you want to cancel the transaction. Well, I, as a buyer's agent, will cancel the transaction for you, and I will be totally honest if you can get your escrow money back or not. So if you go directly to the listing agent, you're doing dual agency, that listing agent is going to do everything they can to keep you from canceling, including the possibility of being dishonest. Whereas I, of course, don't want you to cancel a transaction that we've done a bunch of work for, but I will certainly do that for you if you are being represented by me as your buyer's agent. So I will cancel a transaction. I will take all the heat of the listing agent calling me, telling me this is unacceptable and giving me a lecture. I will take all that heat for you. I may advise you not to do it if I think it's a good deal. I might say, you know, are you sure this is a good deal? Do you want to sleep on it? But if ultimately you came down and said, no, I'm not doing this deal, I will cancel the contract for you. I will not strong arm you and pressure you to continue with a deal you're not comfortable with. I may say, I think this is a good deal, maybe you should sleep on it, but I'm not going to pressure you or force you to go through with a transaction you're not comfortable with. And of course, the listing agent can't force you to do it, but you can take a bunch of blowback and a bunch of abuse, and they may not be totally honest with you as well. Now, I have found most of the time, if I'm representing a buyer and we cancel a contract, that we're under contract again within 3 months for a house that better suits their needs. So again, I don't like to cancel contracts in the middle of it, but if I think it's something that's not a good deal for you or you're not comfortable with, I will cancel the contract and not give you a hard time about it. And then you can find the perfect house that's right for you. So that's it for today. Those are my 10 things you need to know about dual agency. My name is Dawn Dickinson. I am a realtor in the state of Arizona. I sell primarily in Sedona, Verde Valley, Prescott area, and Flagstaff. If you ever have a question about buying or selling a real estate, go to the description below to get my contact information, and you can give me a call, text, email. I will get back to you. I post videos every single week about living in the northern Arizona towns, so I hope to see you back here again next week.